commemoration of the 114th birthday of Thomas Edison, the United States Atomic Energy Commission, in cooperation with the Cincinnati Public Schools and the General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department, presents a program discussing the atomic airplane.
This is Darby Fulton. I'm one of the engineers who work in Cincinnati on the atomic aircraft program. You know, when Edison was young, electricity was an entirely new source of power and energy. In his lifetime, it grew from an interesting discovery into an entire new industry. Every aspect of our lives is affected by the work and developments of this one man. In your lifetime, atomic energy is the new frontier, which is going to move from the laboratory to power ships, submarines, and very soon the atomic airplane itself. With us today is my friend Colonel Fellows, who represents the Lockland office of the Atomic Energy Commission.
Thank you, Darby. On behalf of the Atomic Energy Commission, I wish to thank station WCET, the Cincinnati Public Schools, and the General Electric Company for their assistance and cooperation in making this program possible. The Atomic Airplane Program is a joint effort of the Air Force and the Atomic Energy Commission. The development work itself is done under contract to the government by two companies, Pratt & Whitney in Hartford, Connecticut, and General Electric here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Each company is working on a different idea of the best way to make an atomic aircraft engine. Pratt & Whitney is working on an engine where the reactor is separate and the heat from the reactor is pumped to a radiator in the engine. General Electric is working on the approach where the reactor is included as part of the engine. To tell you about that work, I'd like to call on Mr. Shaw, General Manager of the Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department.
Mr. Shaw, what is the real advantage of a nuclear jet engine over a conventional jet engine?
Well, Dr. Fulton, since first man took to the air, we have attempted to make airplanes which would fly farther and which would stay aloft longer. We've made tremendous advances in all phases of aircraft design, but we have always and will always be limited if we depend upon a system which itself is dependent upon chemical fuel. The farther that an ordinary airplane flies, the more fuel it must carry. For example, one of today's large bombers, a B-52, requires over 100 tons of chemical fuel. We finally reach a point where the more fuel that the airplane carries, the less advantage is achieved from the use of that fuel, since the fuel only serves to carry its own weight. It's no good to make a plane larger and carrying more fuel if it does nothing but pull itself. This is what a pound of uranium looks like. Now, a pound of fissionable uranium contains releasable energy equivalent to about 850 tons of chemical fuel. That's 7 times what would be required in today's largest aircraft. A nuclear airplane will never be limited by its ability to carry fuel. It will be at home in the sky like an atomic submarine is at home in the sea. It will fly days, weeks, over any route at either high or low altitude. Dr. Fulton, unlimited range is the basic advantage of the nuclear aircraft.
Thank you, sir. So we have here the equivalent of 850 tons of jet fuel. But of course, in this form, it's of no more use than a lump of coal without a match to burn it with. To burn this kind of fuel, we need a special kind of furnace called a nuclear reactor. This is John Motef, our supervisor of shield design. John, would you explain to us how we build a nuclear reactor to burn this kind of fuel?
Well, first let's see how we get all that energy from such a small amount of fuel. The burning process is called fission because in certain elements, such as uranium, the atoms have the ability to split and give off heat. As you know, this pound of uranium is made up of billions of atoms. If a neutron enters and strikes one of these atoms, it splits, giving off a tremendous amount of heat and a couple of neutrons. If these neutrons strike another nucleus of uranium, that nucleus then fissions too, releasing its energy and 2 more neutrons. In a very short time, the whole block of uranium is full of fissioning nuclei, and the number of fissions is doubling at a very high rate. And we have a chain reaction that can provide a virtually, of course, it is not enough to release the energy of this fuel. Here we have a pan of jet fuel, which we can release most of its energy in just 1 puff of smoke like this. But to make this fuel push a plane, we have to burn this chemical fuel in a turbojet. And to make nuclear fuel push a plane, again we use a turbojet, but we burn the nuclear fuel in a special assembly called a reactor. To make a nuclear reactor, we start with a few elements. There are always some neutrons that travel within this uranium fuel element. But most are traveling so fast that they shoot right through the fuel and don't have a chance to hit the nuclei. So the chain reaction never gets started. What we need to do is slow these fast neutrons down so that they have the time to bump into other nuclei and cause more fissions. As it happens, hydrogen is ideal for slowing down or moderating neutrons. And since water has a lot of hydrogen, we will just put the fuel elements down into a tank of water. When the neutrons enter, it gets slowed down by the hydrogen in the water and floats around until it bumps into another nucleus and causes a fission. This starts our chain reaction, and soon we have plenty of fissions and a large amount of energy is being released. The fuel elements get hot. The water starts to boil, and we have what is called a boiling water reactor. We need only one more thing, a way to shut it off. We can do this by simply inserting rods of a material that will soak up neutrons and slow down the rate of fission. Now, neutrons in a reactor are absorbed by these rods before they can cause fissions in a chain reaction. Then we can control just how much energy is produced by pulling the rods partway back or pushing them back in. So now we have all the essential components of a reactor. The fuel elements, which contain the uranium to be burned, the moderator to slow down the neutrons, and the control rods to regulate the amount of energy that is being released. But let's get back to the atomic plane engine, because the reactor is simply a source of the energy. In a conventional jet, air is drawn into the engine by the compressor. It then flows into the combustor where it gets heated by burning chemical fuel. To make a nuclear turbojet, all we do is replace the combustor by the reactor. This system is called a direct cycle because the air flows directly through the reactor.
Thank you, John. Then what you've said is that in the direct cycle, the air comes through the compressor, directly through the reactor, through the turbine, and out through the tailpipe, producing the thrust to drive the airplane. To see some actual reactors, let's take a trip to Idaho to the National Reactor Testing Station. Every morning, a fleet of buses leaves Idaho Falls, heading northwest through the flat potato land and desert studded with rock and sagebrush. Off in the distance are the Grand Tetons, and Saddleback Mountain, the landmark that guided hopeful pioneers along the Oregon Trail, looks just the same today to a different kind of pioneer. Here in an isolated desert area, almost the size of the state of Rhode Island, the Atomic Energy Commission tests all high-powered experimental reactors. And here at the site is Heater 1, the reactor that proved the jet engines could be operated on nuclear power. It's pretty hard to recognize the reactor because it's buried inside that large tank of water which shields us from the radiation. To construct this, we built the reactor cores separately from the rest of the machine and hung it in a cocoon inside the big shielding tank. The engines were located outside of the tank and connected to the core by large pipes which carried the hot air from the engine. There are the pipes. Now the air entered the engine and was compressed. Then it passed through the ducts to the reactor core, where it was heated directly by the fuel elements. And then the heated air expanded and rushed back through the return ducts to the jet engine, driving the turbine and blasting out through the tailpipes. Now looking again at the heater itself, you can recognize those parts. The tank of water with the reactor inside, the large pipes leading the air to and from the engine, and the jet engine itself down below. This has been a very successful piece of equipment. It has operated over 150 hours to date and has proved the jet engines can be run on nuclear power. Now I want to show you one of the fuel element cartridges from that reactor. Here we have 18 different sections, every one of which we call a fuel element. They're all put together into this assembly, which we call the cartridge. The air comes straight down through here and gets hotter and hotter as it goes, and comes out down here at about 1400 degrees Fahrenheit in heater 1. These elements operated at over 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Now here is one of the little elements from that cartridge. You see it's made up of rings, and each one of these rings is a thin sandwich with 2 layers of heat-resistant metal on each side and the uranium fuel between. We use this metal for 2 reasons. One is to keep the element in shape when it's operating at the high temperature, and the other is to keep the radioactive fuel from escaping into the air. Because of the radioactivity, these fuel elements have to be processed in a special laboratory with exhaust hoods, protective clothing, and gas masks. The sandwich is assembled, baked in a high-temperature furnace, and sealed to keep the fuel from escaping. Now the sandwich is rolled into a long, thin ribbon and carefully checked for a perfect seal and even thickness. The ribbon is formed into concentric ring fuel elements, and these are stacked together to make the cartridge. 37 of these cartridges were loaded into heater 1, and that was dropped into the cocoon and into the center of the reactor. Now that we had operated heater 1, we needed to take the next step forward. We wanted to develop improved fuel elements that would give us still hotter air, and we wanted something better than water as a moderator. And so we took heater 1 and removed the tubes in the center of it like this, leaving a hole in there so that we call this a hole-in-the-head reactor. And in the hole, we put assemblies with new fuel elements, new moderating materials, and other things that we wanted to experiment with, like that. We call those assemblies inserts. In that way, we were able to prove out a number of new ideas of better fuel elements, moderators, and other things of that kind. Meanwhile, back in Evendale, we were developing a substitute for water as a moderator. Now, water is a very good moderator because it contains a lot of hydrogen, but it is an awkward thing to have in an aircraft engine, and it cannot stand the high temperatures that we have in our reactors. And so we found that we could cause the metal zirconium to soak up as much hydrogen as water contains. And with this hydrided zirconium, we had the kind of moderator we needed for a flight kind of nuclear aircraft engine. After that sort of experimentation and development, we were ready to take the next step. And this we called heater 3. Now here are the improvements that we had in heater 3. First, we had an all-metal shield instead of the water tank that we had used before. Then the reactor core contained these improved parts that we had been developing, including the hydrided zirconium. And we put the core in there in a horizontal position the way it would be in an aircraft engine. Then we added the ducts in the same manner as before, and now 2 jet engines instead of 1. And so we had an assembly that was large enough, powerful enough, and had enough performance to fly an aircraft. Now let's follow Heater 3 through one of its tests in Idaho and see how it was done. It was mounted in a large test bed on a railroad flat car, surrounded by scaffolding and hundreds of test instruments. In an underground control room, the scientists who operate the reactor and the many instruments sit and are protected from the radiation. There they are in the underground control room. Automatic data systems record the hundreds of measurements each hour that the reactor is operating, and a large computer immediately converts these data into usable form. With the conclusion of Heater 3, we have reached a major milestone. Our series of heat transfer experiments has led us, slowly but surely, to the result we've been seeking. Heater 1 proved that jet engines could be operated on nuclear power. Heater 2 showed us how to develop improved components to put into our reactor. And Heater 3 showed the combination and the feasibility of all these components working together at once. Now we are in position to build the flight prototype engine, and we are building that engine now. We have the technology to build it. It is an engine that can fly. Now, one of these engines might look like this. You can see that this is a nice streamlined model that's suitable for going in an airplane. We call this the inline engine because all the parts are located in a straight line along the engine shaft, which runs along through the middle of it like that. Coming in the front, the air goes through the multi-stage compressor. Then it goes through the reactor, where it's heated to a high temperature, and then through the 3-stage turbine and out through the tailpipe in a very high-speed jet. Now, to build an engine like that, many highly skilled persons are essential in carrying out the tests, performing the research, the development, and the design. Mathematicians, physicists, engineers, and technicians of every kind analyze computer data, carry on research in shielding, metallurgy, and build and operate the special facilities and equipment. One of the most important areas is remote handling. Remember that when we are dealing with these radioactive materials, we have to protect the workers who are handling it. And so much of the work is performed by mechanical arms that are controlled from behind thick lead and concrete walls. This is Sam Huffman, who's had a hand in almost everything we've done in ANPD in remote design, in remote handling. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Darby.
Sam, would you explain to us how you go about handling radioactive materials?
Well, here's one answer, the hot shop. We bring radioactive or hot engines and reactors here where we have manipulators, overhead cranes, turntables, and any other equipment we need to do whatever is necessary to be done with these hot reactors and engines.
That's a fascinating place. Can people work in there too?
Under certain conditions.
I see. And what is this over here, Sam?
Over here is an overhead crane. Lifts and positions heavy reactor parts. Beside it is a manipulator, which is kind of a mechanical arm. The operator is behind the 6-foot thick window.
I see. I see him working there now in the picture. It must take a great deal of skill to do that, Sam.
Takes a lot of practice, and we have skillful operators who can assemble and disassemble whole reactors and handle nuts and bolts and other tiny parts, and even whole power plants.
Well, that's very interesting, Sam. What is this machine here on the tape?
This is a unique piece of remote handling equipment which we are having built right now. It is a mobile shielded cab with manipulators known as a Beetle. It is completely self-contained, moving remote handling station. The operator sits in this shielded cab and drives the vehicle and operates the manipulators.
He does everything, does he?
Well, he has a periscope, closed-circuit TV cameras, and he communicates with people on the outside by means of radio.
Well, thank you, Sam. That's a fascinating machine. One of the places where this mobile manipulator will be very useful is the recently completed FET, or Flight Engine Test Facility, in Idaho. Now, that is a building as large as a football field and over 100 feet high. Now, let's talk to Cy Commissar, our supervisor of power plant performance analysis. Cy, looking at this engine, we've learned that the reactor core may be no larger than an office desk. But yet we see now this flight engine test facility that's large enough to hold the entire population of Idaho. Why do we need such a big hangar as that?
Because we aren't testing just the power plant, Darby. This facility was built to permit testing of an entire assembly consisting of a power plant and an aircraft. After the power plant has been tested by itself, it will be assembled in a mock-up of the aircraft, and this complete assembly ground tested right in this hangar. This compact engine you've been discussing will supply power to fly a large plane comparable to the B-52 and the B-70. This plane is the atomic airplane called the NX-2, and here's a model of it. You can see that the engines are in the rear of the plane, surrounded by a shield, and the crew rides far forward, surrounded by a second shield. The Convair Aircraft Company is working on plans for this airplane right now. Exciting, isn't it? But it's really only the beginning. Let me mention some advanced applications of nuclear power. Nuclear power can be used in nuclear rockets. These are of two types. One could use a reactor to heat a propellant such as hydrogen, and in the other type, a reactor could supply power for ion and photon rockets and plasma jets. These devices would be used for travel in space. And here's another aspect. This desk-sized reactor is really a miniature power plant with a fantastic output. It could supply power for a city the size of Wilmington, Delaware. And here's another example. We could have a monster earth mover, which could be used to excavate whole sides of mountains, or a dredge to gouge out bays along seacoasts and channels in lakes and rivers. Vehicles of this size have never been practical before because of the size of the power plant required to run them. Now, in our power plant, as in any reactor, most of the weight is in the shield, but there are some applications where shielding is unnecessary. Here's an idea. This is a nuclear underwater cargo vessel where the engines and reactors are mounted in a pod away from the vessel. The surrounding water becomes the shielding. Water would also be a practical and effective shield in the Arctic. And here we see a miniature reactor which could be suspended below the surface of the water. Now, I don't mean to imply that these devices are close at hand. They're many years away, but they are the kind of applications you can expect to see as the field of atomic energy for propulsion is developed.
Mr. Shaw, we've come a long way now with atomic energy. We've learned how nuclear fuel burns, how to make a reactor to burn it in, and how to combine the reactor with a jet engine. It seems as if we are making progress steadily.
Yes, nuclear energy is moving at a rapid pace. In 16 years, we see atomic energy powering submarines, propelling ships. We see it generating electric power for cities. The possibilities that Mr. Commissar spoke about are coming closer every day. The big question with reference to nuclear aircraft is, when can we actually get a nuclear airplane in the air? The answer to that is that we are building the flight prototype now. The prototype of the engine that can actually fly. That's how close we are. Convair is building the NX-2 airframe which will carry this nuclear engine. We will first ground test that engine, then flight test it. By the mid-1960s, the nuclear airplane will be in the air. Many of you who are watching this program will fly in nuclear-powered aircraft. Some of you younger members of the audience may perhaps be the scientists and the engineers who will design the nuclear spaceships which will follow the work that we are doing. We hope that this program may inspire some of you to want to join us in this interesting, challenging, and rewarding work. Certainly it's true that nuclear aircraft and nuclear spacecraft will share the future with you.